Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Campaign for College Opportunities Equitable Admissions webinar, where today we'll be discussing the redesigning of college preparation and admissions for equity. This, as all of you know, is a part of our series on rethinking equity practices within the confines of our now post-affirmative action world. Today, we are being joined by three incredible leaders in higher education across the country to talk specifically about two new briefs that we have released, one on direct admissions and one on dual enrollment. I know many of you who are joining this call, whether you're on Facebook Live or online with us today on the Zoom, have been talking about all of these practices and wondering, how do we scale them? How do we make sure that they are designed in a way that we actually achieve the outcomes we hope to achieve, and that is closing racial equity gaps in college admissions and in college graduation. So you are in for a robust discussion today with these three amazing leaders, and then we'll be turning things over to you for you to have an opportunity, as we always do, to ask your questions and get the information that you need to make the changes locally that we know you're all committed to doing. Before we get started today, I have a couple of housekeeping items that I want to share. First of all, as you all know, this meeting is being recorded and it is going to be shared on social media so that you can come back to it, revisit it, and others who can't make today can watch. We also ask you to use the Q&A box today to drop your questions in the chat. My colleagues will be monitoring that Q&A chat and make sure that we have those teed up to go to our guest speakers today. So please use the Q&A box, not the chat function, to drop your questions. You can also follow our conversation on social media by using our hashtag Equity Inclusion Action. One of my colleagues will drop that hashtag in the chat for you. But if you're on X, formerly Twitter, if you're on Instagram, use that hashtag. Tell us what you think. Encourage others to join, so we can, again, really expand the echo chamber of this work. Again, before we get started, we'd love to know who all of you are. So I do want to invite you right now to head over to the chat box, drop in your name, drop in your title, organization, and the region that you're coming from, and let us know again where you're joining us from. So that's your name, your organization, and your region, so we know again who's with us on today's call. So with that, I want to kick us off for today's webinar, again, talking about admissions and really rethinking a couple of key interventions, namely direct admissions and dual enrollment. So we're going to kick off our conversation today with Dr. John Fink, who is the Senior Research Associate and the Program Lead at the Community College Research Center out of Teachers College at Columbia University. As I shared with all of you before, John has just produced a brief for us where he's going to be talking about dual enrollment programs and how those work, how we can strengthen them, and how they can be scaled effectively. So John, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn the table over to you.
Thank you, Audrey. Really appreciate seeing everyone this afternoon. And thanks to the whole campaign team, especially Michelle and Vikash for their excellent work as series editors, and the reviewers for this brief on dual enrollment, Linda Collins, McCall Curleander, Olga Rodriguez, just really great feedback throughout the process. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes on just sort of some overall recommendations and takeaways from this first brief, which is focused on really the potential of high school dual enrollment to increase equity in access to higher education and really address big challenges in the high school to college transition that we're facing now, with just declining rates of college going and really a questioning of the value of college. And so the first thing, folks just need to know about dual enrollment is that I'm using this term, we use it in the brief very sort of broadly to capture a variety of different types and styles and programs across the country where students are, oftentimes in high school, but really we say before the end of high school, because there are some middle school students who take these courses, but most of it is, sophomore, juniors, and seniors in high school that are taking a college course through a post-secondary institution partner for college credit before they complete high school. So we call this dual enrollment, but it has, one study found like 97 terms across the country: dual credit, concurrent enrollment, and on and on. But so I sort of say this as an umbrella term, dual enrollment, and that really this based on the review of the research here, dual enrollment really has amazing potential to increase equity in the access to higher education for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's very widespread already. It's already operating at a large scale across the country in its many sort of shapes and sizes. So for example, there's like over 1.5 million high school students that are taking some form of college course every year. And this is separate from advanced placement or AP or international baccalaureate or other types of advanced courses in high school. This is, almost 2 million now high school students taking these courses. Most of that is happening through the local community college. And at the Community College Research Center, this is why we've gotten really sort of focused on dual enrollment, is because now the high school students make up about 1 in 5 community college enrollments across the country. So it's a large and significant population. And the potential is that, decades of empirical research has really shown that this is a very strong educational intervention in terms of benefiting participants. Students who take these dual enrollment courses, shown to have stronger high school outcomes, stronger enrollment rates in college, college completion rates, among other sort of positive benefits of participating, especially in like more intensive models like the early college high school model, which provide a lot of coursework with a lot of supports for students and really focus on communities and students that are underrepresented in higher education. So we know that this dual enrollment in its many formats can really benefit students, and it's already at a large scale. But largely, this is not reaching its potential. Dual enrollment is not sort of yet meeting its potential on a national level for increasing equity in higher education. Because various reasons that I sort of explore in the brief, but just to sort of summarize, there have been exclusionary policies, practices, and really mindsets or beliefs about these programs that have prevented them from really serving this equity purpose in the transition to college. So policies like just the lack of funding for these courses, where the costs are sort of been borne by students and families, transportation, the availability of credentialed instructors to teach these courses are just some of the sort of challenges, to name a few. Also policies that require students to pass sort of high stakes placement testing, is another example of a policy that's been exclusionary to students of color and other underrepresented groups in these programs. And then at the level of practice, sort of a lack of intentionality about the potential of these programs to expand access and equity, like a lack of outreach, advising, or supports for racially minoritized communities, as well as just sort of outdated mindsets around like who these programs are for, like misbeliefs that these acceleration programs are just for more privileged, advanced, affluent, white students, that it's really just for the purpose of acceleration and not for access and acceleration. So I think the good news is that, these are outdated mindsets, and there really is sort of encouraging change underway, both at the policy and level of practice. And so in the brief, I summarize what do we know from effective models of dual enrollment for advancing equity in college access and attainment, as well as what are some of the policy recommendations that go along. So just to sort of hit some of those high points from the brief. The first is that from the level of practice, we actually sort of are starting to know more about what effective equitable practices look like in the context of high school college partnerships, and really strong partnerships that work to broaden access to college for groups that are underrepresented. So, take, for example, the early college high school model, which has been pretty well defined and evaluated in like randomized controlled trials that, you see that there is this strong, double-digit sort of percentage point gains in terms of college enrollment and completion, around the implementation of this model, very rigorous sort of evidence. And so one of the questions that researchers, including my team at CCRC, we've taken up is, we know this early college high school model works very well, particularly with a focus on underserved communities. What can we take from that model and sort of scale up to the much larger, where you have millions of students just more taking, a la carte dual enrollment courses, just sort of 1 or 2 or 3 courses during their high school experience. And that's been an important question because the early college high school model, even though it's very effective, there's just like a limitation to scale and additional costs that need to sort of create more and more high schools. And we've also studied, just effective partnerships that with the Aspen Institute, we wrote this in the dual enrollment playbook, visited sites that themselves had achieved really strong outcomes for Black and Latinx students, both in terms of access to dual enrollment, but also subsequent college success. And we sort of documented the effective practices. And then more recently, we've been looking at colleges that are further along in their implementation of guided pathways reforms, which is largely focused on not non-dual enrollment students, but really trying to learn from those colleges that are really extending those guided pathways practices to their high school dual enrollment populations and, showing some strong results in terms of broadening access for Black and Latino students. And so, we review some of that in the brief, both like the what does this look like, outreach to communities of color, alignment of the dual enrollment courses to post-secondary pathways with advising and supports for students along the way, maintaining the high expectations and quality of the college course, but really upping the supports to ensure that students aren't just getting into these courses, but they're being successful in the course and they have the right supports. So I think just to end, the policy, there's all different sorts of state policies across the country around dual enrollment, and just some of the recommendations presented in this brief. But just to first start by just framing and prioritizing equity as a goal of dual enrollment programs, and really publicly tracking progress towards that with sort of transparent measures disaggregated by race and income and other factors around access, but also success through these courses. I think that's just like, we can't really do much without both that vision, but also the sort of transparency around how states are doing. Eliminating cost as a barrier. I mean, I think that just full stop, I don't think we can advance equity through dual enrollment if students and families are expected to pay for these courses in high school. We talk about sort of conducting equity audits of existing policy, and in particular, really looking for when states govern the eligibility requirements for dual enrollment programs, really thinking through, what might be exclusionary about requiring like a high stakes single placement test, which have been shown to have cultural biases, but also sort of discriminate in other ways, just like in access to the testing or test prep strategies. And then finally, I think one of the biggest barriers to really scale, and in particular, sort of more underserved communities, including like rural communities, is just the need for a greater supply of instructors to teach these courses. Most of dual enrollment courses are taught at the high school through as a credentialed instructor that is qualified to teach these as college level courses. But that sort of qualification itself is a major barrier to sort of further scaling and casting a wide net around who can benefit from these programs that have really been shown to benefit those who participate.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fink, for that overview of your brief. I do want to encourage everyone on this webinar to take a look at the brief. It is we did our best to try to make these really usable, very short briefs, very action oriented, how you set this up, how you can evaluate, what are recommendations for practitioners, policymakers to implement an effective dual enrollment program. So I know my colleagues have dropped the link to the brief in the chat. I do hope that you have a chance to read it. I want to again thank Dr. Fink for all the work on the brief to produce that. And we're going to come back to Dr. Fink shortly with a series of questions I know I have for you in reading through the brief. And I know that others will have. But right now we're going to turn our attention to Dr. Taylor Odle, who's an assistant professor of education policy studies at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Dr. Odle was the author of our direct admissions paper, and I'm really excited, Dr. Odle, to have you today and learn more about this promising practice. I can just, in reading your brief, I imagine the excitement that can exist on a high school when an institution shows up and directly admits students, or when students, without even applying, get something in the mail saying, you've got a spot here. So I think the potential to me for this intervention is really fascinating, and can't wait to hear more. So turning it over to you.
Thanks, Audrey. I want to just start off by saying, echoing John's sentiments, I really appreciate the campaign for leading this initiative and for giving the opportunity to uplift this practice, and especially to all of the reviewers for their great feedback on propelling and really developing this brief. So I want to start by kind of talking a little bit about what is direct admissions for folks who may be less familiar. I feel like we're seeing it in the news almost every day now, and so it's important to kind of set our base foundation. And so you may have heard it referred to as direct admissions, or automatic, or flipped, or guaranteed, or proactive admissions. But at a fundamental level, it rethinks the entire kind of college-going process by asking, do students need to apply to college? We know from a variety of research, over a decade of research now, that the college application process is overly complex. It's been referred to as a gauntlet. Students have to search for multiple institutions, manage different deadlines, write resumes, request letters of recommendation, submit test scores. In a recent survey of high schoolers, over 50% said that applying to college was their most stressful academic experience. But in reality, we actually know that the vast majority of students, 84% of college students, attend institutions that accept 100% or 75% or more of their applicants. Most students in higher education are enrolled in open access or minimally selective institutions. So rather than asking students to compile and submit this kind of immense amount of information that we're not really using to make admissions decisions, direct admissions then says, well, why don't we utilize information that we already have available, like high school GPA, course grades, or standardized test scores, to just simplify the process for everyone. So typically under these programs, all students are openly admitted to open access institutions, and those that surpass specific thresholds are then admitted to more selective institutions. So as Audrey mentioned, without ever applying, students receive this official college acceptance that guarantees their place in college. It also gives them personalized college-going information, a fee waiver so they can submit a simplified form that's focused on enrollment, not an application, and gives them kind of targeted information on how to claim their place in college. Very simple steps they need to do to enroll. So in this way, the idea behind direct admissions is instead allowing students to focus on deciding whether to go to college and where to go to college, rather than focusing on doing some kind of mundane, administrative tasks like running this gauntlet to apply. And so 11 states so far and hundreds of post-secondary institutions have started operating these direct admissions programs. But why does this matter for equity and equal opportunity? Well, we know there are these long-standing gaps in post-secondary enrollment rates, particularly by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. And what some of us might say are like simple steps, like just applying to college, actually isn't that simple. Administrative burdens, like applying to college, are racialized, and they fall disproportionately by socioeconomic lines. So the weight of the complexity of applying to college and the uncertainty of knowing whether you're not going to be admitted falls disproportionately on students of color, students who will be first in their family to enroll in college, and students from low-income backgrounds. So navigating this like status quo application process requires students to leverage a really high level of financial and social and cultural capital that is itself unequally distributed. So that means our current college admissions and application process structurally disadvantages already underserved students. So rather than trying to help students overcome this barrier, which I think a lot of our policies and practices focus on, direct admissions then says, what if we just get rid of the barrier altogether? We also know there are these really wide gaps in college going expectations. If you ask the average student of color in ninth grade whether they think they'll go to college versus you ask a white student or a wealthier student whether they think they'll go to college, there are these big gaps in students if they think they are college material. And so direct admissions kind of then says, you are college material and there's a place for you. So in the brief, I try and review not only how these practices came about and how they're implemented in states, but I also talk about the available evidence on these policies. And so in states like Idaho, which was the first to implement direct admissions, they saw college enrollments rise between 4 and 8% following introduction. When we evaluated the program, we saw that these increases were driven by more in-state students enrolling in college and more students enrolling in open access or two-year institutions. And we currently have partnerships with states like Hawaii and Minnesota to evaluate, who are other early adopters of direct admissions, to evaluate their programs. But beyond these state adoptions, we partnered with the national nonprofit Common App to run 3 rounds of experiments with a diverse set of institutions across many states. And so in one pilot, we partnered with 3 HBCUs, and we directly admitted over 3,000 Black, Latinx, first-gen, and low-income students to 3 institutions in Maryland, Tennessee, and Virginia. And so we automatically and proactively gave these students official college acceptances letters and simplified the steps they needed to do. We pared down the Common App to 5 to 7 questions, and we kind of gave them personalized information on what they needed to do. We told them about scholarships and about financial aid availability. And we found that students in our treatment group were 4 times more likely to complete that simplified form, and were 30% more likely to apply to another institution. And those impacts were largest for our Black students and students who would be first in their family to enroll in college. In other pilots we've done since, we most recently randomized over 32,000 students across 4 states to be directly admitted to one of 6 partner institutions. And this included R1s, HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, and privates. And we found students in this pool were about 12% more likely to submit that simplified form and twice as likely to apply than students who were in the control group. And again, those impacts were largest for racially minoritized first-gen and low-income students. So what are some recommendations when we think about direct admissions programs? And the first is that, like everything in higher ed, we must acknowledge that direct admissions is not a panacea, right? There's still other major barriers to college access, and one of those is affordability. I encourage you to read the brief because you will see some of these really powerful quotes from students and families about what it feels like to be directly admitted, to have kind of someone say you are college material and there is a spot for you. But we also have quotes from institutional administrators who are also helping students navigate these other barriers, and one of those is affordability. So even if folks are admitted to college, they still have to pay the price to enroll. And we had one institutional administrator say, even though students were directly admitted and they may have even paid an enrollment deposit, when they got their final bill, they then realized, it still wasn't affordable to them. And so the institution is now rethinking how they target financial aid, or if they can pair these 2 things together. So direct admissions helps us move students further along the college going process by wiping away these structural barriers and signaling to them post-secondary opportunities. But it's necessarily going to be insufficient alone if we pretend like there are not other barriers for Black, Latinx, low income, and first-gen students. And so one recommendation is to pair direct admissions with other equity-minded strategies like financial aid, like application assistance, and college coaching, that we have really rigorous evidence on that these strategies also work at promoting college access. So I encourage folks to think of direct admission as one piece of a larger puzzle at improving these college-going outcomes. Second, as you think about evolving direct admissions programs or thinking about how it might work for you or folks in your state, I would say maintain the principles of direct admissions: automation, simplicity, and proactivity. Be proactive. Our status quo waits for students to find us, to find their way to college. And that means those who are already advantaged are going to find their way. And so we can't keep waiting for students to come to us. We need to put that information into their hands. Remember that admissions is guaranteed. So folks are automatically admitted to college. They don't need to apply. It is a sure thing for them. Sending out letters telling that students need to still apply is not direct admission, that's direct marketing. So remember that everyone is served. 100% of students are admitted to college. Don't design a direct admissions program that only serves students who are already highly academic achieving, because on average, they're likely to already be going to college. Everyone should have some post-secondary opportunity after high school. So keep those principles in mind, and also keep it simple, right? Be simple and transparent. For students, make it easy to understand why they were admitted to college. Tell them exactly what they need to do to enroll and provide them support so that they can actually do that. So I'll say, finally, I'll conclude by saying, don't go at it alone, right? You'll need to decide a lot of things. Where are you going to get data? What's your threshold going to be? How are you going to tell students? What's going to be in the letter? There are lots of states and lots of researchers who have been thinking about this for years now, since 2015, 2016. So engage with others, engage researchers, and learn from them. We, alongside several states, have literally been answering these questions for years and have been convening robust communities of practice where people can ask the nitty-gritty details of how are you doing this? What are we doing? And for kind of, as Audrey alluded, how do we make sure that we're serving the populations that we're focused on for direct admissions? So I really look forward to engaging with you all in the Q&A. And I want to say again, thank you so much to the campaign for the opportunity to uplift this work.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for that quick overview of your brief. Again, I want to encourage everyone who's joining us today to click on that link in the chat and download Taylor's assessment, his brief on direct admissions. I think, again, it's an easy read. It's incredibly insightful. And I appreciate, Taylor, what you said there at the end, that, you know, direct admissions and even dual enrollment, this is not about reinventing the wheel. What we're hoping that we're bringing to all of you are practices that really have demonstrated through data and evidence that they are working to improve access for underrepresented minoritized students. And so to the extent that you can read these briefs and the campaign and the experts that are here with us today can connect you with where it's working and how you can think about design, how you can think about policy, please do that. We want to be a part of the strategies and the solutions we're working on nationally to improve our higher education system so that it is serving all students. We're now going to bring all of our speakers back together to get into a little bit of back and forth with some questions that we have. And I want to introduce our newest panelist this morning, Dr. Adrián Trinidad, who's the Associate Director for Community College Partnerships at the USC Race and Equity Center. Thank you so much, Adrián, for being with us today. We're so grateful to have you. For those of you who know the incomparable Dr. Estela Ben-Simon, Adrián has been working with her then at the Center for Urban Education for several years, and I will say is one of those individuals who is really leading the charge on what it means to be equity-minded, to walk the walk across higher education, and particularly at our California community colleges, whereas all of you know, over 70% of students in college in California are attending. It is the institution really of choice. And when we look at our minoritized students, our Black students, our Latino students, we see closer to 80% of those students who are in college in California at a community college. So an incredibly important system. And when they can and do get equity right, can really be transformative for our entire state. So I want to kick off, Adrián, with a question for you on dual enrollment. I know that you had an opportunity to hear John's presentation and John's, read John's brief on dual enrollment, but I know that you have been looking at some of the reforms that have been happening at our community colleges, right? In the last few years, colleges have been, because of AB 705, doing away with remedial education. And we see a large number of students now, community college students, being placed directly into college level English, college level math, more students than ever are accessing those courses and completing those courses. But there are still real challenges with our faculty truly supporting students to complete those courses. And when I think about high school students who may be even less prepared coming onto a community college campus, how do we ensure that those students are getting the faculty that are committed and prepared to serve them? How do we ensure that we have mechanisms to ensure that we don't see minoritized students coming from under-resourced high schools coming into a dual enrollment program and then maybe being turned off by college because they aren't coming into a welcoming environment that is prepared to serve them?
Thank you, Audrey, for that question, and thank you for the invitation. And it's a really good question. I would think to that, and by the way, the briefs were really insightful and interesting to read and reflect on. I think where I would start for faculty is really understanding how are they educated, right? I think most educators in this country are indoctrinated, if you will, into a culture of whiteness and into a culture of not talking about race or racial inequities. That is a kind of standard practice generally in graduate schools across this country. And that's a real big problem. I would also say and ask, how are they being hired? So if you look at criteria for hiring, it tends to assume that if you have content area expertise, that translates into effective teaching practices. I have a PhD and I was not trained to be an effective teacher or instructor, right? I was trained to study methods, quantitative methods, and how to make arguments, but teaching was not a part of that. And so hiring, I think, should really take into account competencies and things that actually show and improve student success outcomes, things like equity-mindedness, culturally affirming and relevant practices and policies, race consciousness. I would also ask, how are they being trained? A lot of professional development in California, but also other states, tends to not really focus on issues of racial equity, right? So how are educators being trained into this kind of culture of self-inquiry, of being able to look at your practices and calling out injustices? Most academic departments, in this country tend to focus, until you get tenure, they tend to focus on keeping your head down and not upsetting folks, not talking about race or raising issues like that, right? So training is really important and setting a culture of racial equity. Last thing I would say, is how are faculty being evaluated? So, and also who benefits from that evaluation criteria? Is it students? I'm not sure, right? But I think we need to ask ourselves these very difficult questions to ensure that minoritized students, have experiences that are affirming and enriching.
Thank you so much for that, Adriana. I'm going to ask you one more question related to direct admissions. So as Taylor was talking about, the direct admissions opportunities, community colleges can obviously offer, direct admissions, even though they're open access, let students know you've got a spot here. None of these, dual enrollment, direct admissions, they don't exist in isolation. So if a student, let's just say in East Los Angeles at Garfield High School, is directly admitted and gets a letter to say, you can come to ELAC in the fall, we're saving your spot, you don't need to apply, we've already got you on the book. What does ELAC need to have in place to ensure that those students are successful, given the fact that we know, the 6-year completion rate at our community colleges really only hovers, around 40%. So what are those kind of infrastructure things that need to exist at the college once a direct admissions offer is made?
I think I would even ask the question of like how or why rather are we even calling them dual enrollment students? They should really just be called college students and treated that way. Because I think really dual enrollment can be and should be a bridge to college, as this conversation, with direct admissions as well. Students should be learning all the things that come with attending college in a culturally affirming way, right? So when you're taking that class, you're also understanding what are office hours? How do you engage a faculty member during office hours? What questions should you be asking during office hours? And also letting that student know, hey, this person is being paid to be there for you during office hours, right? This is you're not inconveniencing them. So really kind of demystifying college and the journey to college and being able to make connections between what they're learning and to specific fields, right? And the things that they're interested in, because learning should be fun, and students should feel like they belong in the class by having, faculty, curriculum, and programming that is tailored to them as students and their peers, right? So that basically by the time that a student is a junior, there's no question, I think, where they're going to college, because their top choice will be a community college, because that community college has set a foundation of letting them know how they're being supported and how they will be supported throughout their college journey, and demystifying the process of college.
Thank you so much for that, Adrian. I want to turn the microphone, so to speak, back to John. A question on dual enrollment. What can you tell us about the success students have in dual enrollment courses? Are all students, completing courses equitably? Are students going on to enroll in more dual enrollment courses after maybe their first one? What are some of the trends you're seeing?
Sure. Thanks for that question. I think, what we see from just students like success in the dual enrollment courses is that the sort of course pass rates and grades, like for community colleges in particular, tend to be generally higher than sort of non-dual enrollment. And part of that is like there's a selection effect happening, and that's part of the exclusionary part too. But what we hear from many colleges is the course pass rates are more like in the 90%, but there's still like equity gaps, and sort of like there, if you look at that by race, in particular, they're like that. Just like colleges would look at, disaggregated course pass rates for, other, non-high school courses, that is an issue. And so what we hear colleges doing is both to sort of like look at those course pass rates disaggregated by race, but also look by high school and by modality. There's been a big expansion of online dual enrollment, compared to face-to-face or taught at the high school. And so I think the folks who are sort of really trying to work on the potential for racial equity in dual enrollment that we speak to are really they're getting down to that level to really get closer to practice. And then, like Adrian was saying, like trying to really think about the professional development, the hiring, the training. But I would say that's almost, that's definitely not the conventional practice. There's like a huge need for that, because, more what we'd heard in our fieldwork is like, trying to find instructors that have some prior background in K-12 or like in teaching in a high school. So they might have more familiarity with that setting, which I think is helpful, but it's definitely missing like the focus on like race conscious and inclusive teaching practices for the most part. So I think that's like a huge need, because you do, even though the pass rates are higher, you still see those gaps.
That's helpful, John. Have you seen in your field work any, school in particular that has identified these racial equity gaps and has implemented something that's actually moved the needle to close those gaps?
Yeah, so, well, first off, I should say we conducted our fieldwork in Texas and Florida. So, to some extent, some of this like professional development is just prohibited. But I would also say that there is like really, there's folks really doing this work that are really focused on access and serving populations that are just underrepresented in their programs. And, when they look at the data, it's Black and Latinx students, it's low income students. And so, we did see like, these sort of practices focused on, outreach to families in communities, like with the K-12 partners, like places we visited, like dual enrollment is free. This is like free college. So do folks know about that? Do all communities know about that? And like, how do you actually get connected to families that might otherwise not know? So that's a huge thing. It's including like going to middle schools and like bringing student ambassadors that look like the folks that are from the high school that the middle school feeds into, and saying that this is free college, but it's also a relevant college course that connects to your interests. And, it's hopefully taught well, so that's part of that, like, how do we support them to make it a high quality course, but that it's a start of something after high school. And so, and when there's good advising, and a plan connected to that pathway, so I can drop the link in, but we described some of this in some recent research came out a couple of weeks ago of just like, what could this look like? I think that piece really around relevance too can be transformative. We hear for high school students who, are getting access to a college course, you could take like a Spanish literature course. You could take something like health informatics that might not otherwise be available. That could really sort of open up new possibilities and worlds, when it's well taught with the right supports. So it's really, we talk a lot about this potential and really trying to how to work towards that and what's needed.
Thanks so much, John. I'm going to come to you, Taylor, next, really with the same question. I know in your brief, you talked about, I think it was Idaho, Hawaii, and Minnesota, suggesting that when they, were in the thick of their direct admissions statewide, efforts, that they actually were not attracting underrepresented first-gen students. In fact, they were really attracting and enrolling, students that weren't first gen, students that were white, that were more affluent. From your vantage point and the research that you've done, how do we need to design these differently so that it is getting, again, at the target population?
Yeah, great question, Audrey. So I'll say, while we love Idaho, it's not the easiest place to study racial diversity. And unfortunately, there's no central place from the US Department of Education to observe students on a national level to identify first generation students. And so we rely on a host of other indicators to kind of observe those students. And so data on racial and ethnic minority enrollment changes in Hawaii and Minnesota are a key focus of our ongoing work. And so we will have more details to share on how their direct admissions programs may have influenced the enrollment rates of racially minoritized students there. But you're right, when we look into Idaho and specifically think about Pell eligible enrollments, kind of a proxy for students from low income backgrounds, we don't see a key change in enrollment levels there. And the same when we were looking at our Common App experiments about thinking about focus populations there. And so I would start off by saying, first, the good news is that direct admissions isn't widening these gaps. And in a lot of post-secondary policies that we implement, they do have unintended consequences where we think they're going to do one thing, but they actually do another. And so direct admissions is supporting students, it's raising overall rates kind of for everyone, but we want to keep an eye toward closing them. And so I'll caveat that in our experiment, college enrollment rates for our sample of students were 89%. So those are remarkably already high. And so we need to be thinking about the populations for which direct admissions is likely to be most impactful for. And those are students who are deciding, do I go to college or not students deciding, oh, do I pick this 4-year or that 4-year? And so available and developing evidence that states are working on, that we're working on, are going to be really critical to helping us unpack that question. But in the meantime, what we need to be focused on is, again, thinking about closing these gaps and designing direct admissions programs to be most well situated to do that, right? So we already know that uncertainty and complexity in the college application process disproportionately harm students of color, first-gen students, students who are from less affluent backgrounds. And so direct admissions is a conceptual right step in that direction. but we need to be thinking about what else is particularly a large barrier for these populations. And one is college affordability. So we need to be thinking about how do we pair multiple interventions together in a way. Imagine, Audrey, you will wake up one day, you go out to the mailbox, hey, you've been directly admitted to your local university, and here's a scholarship in that same letter that tells you how you can pay for it. And you need to go to this one website and submit this one free 5-question form that says, hey, I plan to show up, connect me with an advisor to help reduce, some remote, or connect me with someone on campus who can help me. And so I think thinking about direct admissions in that way is going to be how we best position this to better achieve racial equality, of understanding that students don't experience the college going pipeline in a vacuum, right? It's not just admissions, it's not just affordability, it's a host of other factors. So we need to put all of the pieces together and think about a more holistic kind of high school to college transition journey.
I appreciate that, Taylor. And again, the reiteration that so many of these policies can only be successful if they are wrapped with other supports for students that are really meaningful. And you're right, affordability is key to that. I want to take a step back though on something you said, and thinking about those campuses that are university campuses that are more selective, that are doing direct admissions, and thinking about, it seems to me that direct admissions is really utilizing GPA and an index score in some way, right? Some sort of index. Whether, I don't know if that's a standardized test or something else, but obviously in that environment, students don't have an opportunity to do, there's no holistic review. There's no storytelling there about who they are. At a selective institution, could that actually flip in a way that is not beneficial to minoritized students? Because maybe they don't have the highest GPA, but they're working, but a university may never know that.
Yeah, an equally important question. And I actually think it's the opposite. I think maybe this automation can free up time or focus areas for admissions officers who are traditionally maybe reading thousands of these holistic, essays for people. If we can streamline the process for some, maybe then we can use that efficiency, if you will, in time to be sure that we're actually really giving these holistic factors or these diverse experiences for students kind of more weight or more time to consider those in context. So under the current design, I don't think direct admissions is necessarily positioned to keep students out of college, right? So no institution, especially a selective institution, will receive 100% of their freshman class from direct admissions, right? There's always going to be direct admissions. There's always going to still be the traditional college application process. In states where students aren't directly admitted to selectives, they can still apply to, those selective institutions, and holistic admissions still exists. And so what I want to say though is, if a state or if a selective institution thinks about adopting direct admissions, I think that also then just says they should be able to then also reaffirm their commitment to actively seek out students from low-income backgrounds, first-gen students, and those who will be racially minoritized, right? So as institutions are thinking about recruiting these students, whether they're going to get some efficiencies for some, or have a more diverse, holistic recruitment pool, if you will, for others, I think it still gives them time to think about what students are we bringing into the pipeline. Also, direct admissions could be effective at identifying particularly high achieving, right, low income students, high achieving students of color in areas that we know from other briefs in this series, right, like recruitment redlining, where many institutions aren't even visiting parts of the state where students of color and students from low income backgrounds are heavily concentrated in. And so I think we need to be aware of this, and as institutions think about adopting direct admissions programs, they need to go in with eyes wide open, right? We need to be tracking the intended and unintended outcomes of these policies. I want to just really quickly say though, from my experience working with so many states and so many institutions, we need to ask some of our selective institutions to really level set their position in the higher education enterprise and as engines of access and economic mobility. I've heard from many, many institutions, including state flagships, who say like direct admissions isn't for us, or, we can only use holistic review, or we can only, we only select students who will be successful for us. Yet many of those have 70, 80+% acceptance rates. And so institutions in this category need to be thinking about who they're serving and who they think they are actually serving, and kind of, I think, ask a hard question about why can't direct admissions be a viable pathway for students of color, for low-income students from underrepresented backgrounds into their institution? Because if it's we're going to only accept students who go through this like administrative application process, then that kind of says we're really only interested in students who are already a little privileged.
Such a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, right? Those institutions, to your point, that are at 70, 80% admit rates. Why? I mean, what a good question. Why are we having students go through this rigorous, time-consuming, and really stressful and overwhelming process that could actually be a deterrent for students to apply, to finish an application process, or maybe stop at that institution and not apply to other places because it's been a challenge. I want to just quickly say, you said there is no place nationally that we are collecting as a country first generation data. Is that?
Yeah, we're trying to get better on it, because think about how we could, from the college scorecard, and I think folks are trying to now think about how we define, but we don't have a commonly accepted definition of what is a first gen student, right? Is it one parent? Is it both parents? Is it a guardian? Is it an AA? Is it a BA? There are many institutions, especially selectives, who define first gen as being the first in your family to attend a selective institution. And so I think once we come to a more commonly acceptable and kind of way that we can operationalize this definition, we should push forward and think about how do we more holistically kind of collect that at a national scale.
And Taylor, what would be your advice? How would you define it?
I would think about being a first generation student as any engagement in post-secondary education. So at a community technical college, all the way up to like what you might consider as a selective institution. But I also think that as we have learned the benefits of being nuanced and how we capture students, particularly race ethnicity data, we are still making headway on that, even though we've been collecting it for quite a while. Perhaps we should think about disaggregating this for students. So first gen students are not a monolithic category either. And so we should think about a student who has one parent who's maybe completed a degree, a student who's had a parent enroll in an AA program or something like that as well. But we definitely need
Adrienne, how would you?
minds.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to cut you off, Taylor. Adrienne, how would you, if you were advising? I know we've got somebody here that serves on the help committee in DC. How would you define first generation if you were advising?
To Taylor's point, I think I would also disaggregate that, because that kind of detail, if your parents attended college versus completed a bachelor's degree or a higher degree, I think that difference matters. And also, I would even say, like, some parents, thinking of myself as a child of immigrants, so a lot of immigrants have experiences where they came to this country and they had bachelor's degrees in their home country, and they come here, but it's not legitimized in the same way, right? So being able to understand the different experiences that a first generation college student has based on the experiences of their parents, I think really matters.
Thank you for that. I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Vikash Reddy, who's going to now lead us through the audience Q&A. And I know we've got at least 7 questions in queue already. So with that, I will turn it over to Vikash.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I do also just want to say thank you to both of these authors of these briefs. They were a pleasure to work with in the process. And Adrienne, thank you also for being here. So I have a question, one that I want to start with that I think actually, all 3 of you should chime in on. It's just thinking about the outreach and the sort of the, dare I call it, marketing strategies, right? And so, how do we reach out to students, to parents, to educators? Taylor, I think about sort of if you're a high school student who maybe isn't in a college going culture and you get that letter, is that really something that you're going to pay attention to? Are there other outreach strategies go with that? John, similar question. Maybe the course is available, but you don't know about it. You don't think it's for you. And Adrienne, generally on those and other strategies, right? The outreach and the strategies to make sure that students and families and educators, right, are aware of these options.
I'll start really quickly by just saying direct admissions requires a really comprehensive communications and outreach strategy. Being guaranteed a place in college isn't useful if you don't know that that is the case. And so one of the key tenets of direct admissions is also ensuring that we engage what we call like responsible adults in the process as well. So when a student gets their college admission letter, what we're also going to do is give their counselor their admission letter, give a principal their admission letter, and send that admission letter also to their parents. So there's kind of a robust network of folks who can check on that student to kind of provide follow-ups and to kind of legitimize it, like, oh, yes, this was the case. Also, it's important for us to engage across our communities. So with places like the College Advising Corps, like the National Association of College Admission Counseling, folks like that, so that people at four-year institutions, people at two-year institutions, people at high schools, people at nonprofit and community-based organizations also are aware of this. So kind of everywhere a student turns, they're talking about their college opportunities, and we all know uniformly where they can go to get support, right? We're not kind of siloing information in one place or another.
Yeah, I was, as you're asking that question, Vikash, I was thinking about like, what's the message? Who's the messenger? I think well, first off, like on the message, when we hear about like folks doing outreach around dual enrollment, like one theme is like the message is like, this is a debt-free pathway to a college degree in something that you're interested in that's going to add value and open up opportunities for you. But really this focus on like affordability and it being debt-free, that like really came through like very commonly, and it really lands with families and communities and students who are questioning the value or just the cost of college. The messenger, I think one of the big things from the research and our field work is like student ambassadors, sending out current dual enrollment students to talk about it to middle school students, like for instance, from the community, from the high school that the middle school feeds into, sending the high school student out to like the Boys and Girls Club. Like one of the colleges we visited, it was like the Boys and Girls Club kickball game and dual enrollment information session night, kind of like or the basketball game at Tallahassee Community College. That was dual enrollment student night, where they're kind of giving awards to students who are in dual enrollment. So really that community outreach, connecting with parents and families and bringing them into the process, because if you're a parent, you've got like a high school student, you're like, you're telling me what they're going to what college to take what college courses? And, on the first gen question too, there's the need for just educating students and their parents around like, what does it mean to take a college course? And just like the differences to what it's a high school course. And then the last thing I'll say is from the colleges, if there's college folks on here that are working with dual enrollment, you should really be thinking about like all of the high schools in your service area. And like, which ones are you working with and which ones aren't you working with so much? And as much as like that's really important in addition to disaggregating by student characteristic, because unfortunately in our country, we have such a racially and sort of socioeconomically, divided neighborhoods and stratified school systems. So if you really look at like your Title I high schools, your low income, your high schools with large populations of Black and Latinx students, where's that racial segregation happening in your community, and are you working with all the high schools? And so I think this like school by school strategy is also a kind of a key thing. And what's encouraging is that it's where the buildings are, where these high schools are, who's the principal, like so like what's sort of stopping folks from really connecting with everyone?
I think I would frame this question through policy and thinking about outreach broadly and how the problem is being defined, the problem of access and outreach. Because I think, to the brief, John, how can it be that white students are taking dual enrollment classes at twice the rate than Black and Latinx students? Like, how does that happen? Like asking yourselves that question or leading meetings with that question when you're looking at the data. Like you can't say that Black and brown kids don't want the college credit, right? So I think it's, it's a structural problem, and we know the data, it's been there for a long time, but I don't think we necessarily talk about it with the kind of urgency that we need to talk about it. And so being able to humanize the stories and like the data is really important to frame what's happening. And I think for policymakers, like being able to describe to the public, hey, there's this huge missed opportunity in our system of higher education where folks have and should have access to these classes that have all these benefits. But if, you know, if dual enrollment has and direct admissions has all these benefits to high school students, and if we agree as a community that, you know, that college is a public good, and people will disagree with me about that, but generally there's a lot of benefits to college, right? Then I think we should be asking very deep questions about why we aren't filling the void of qualified teachers, instructors in Black and brown communities and schools, right? Mandating that students have an actual opportunity, a real opportunity to take a college class if they wanted to, and then being able to use data of all kinds to really shape that story and the kind of framing of that so people are crystal clear.
So, Adrian, I'd actually love to come back to you and say, you know, can we actually combine some of these messages instead of saying these courses are available if you want them, to say, you know, you will be directly admitted to college at the end of your high school. You should start taking them now. How do we, is that a message? Is that a way to, you know, to one of the questions in the chat, how do we, you know, how do we combine sort of outreach and outreach, I guess, for these programs?
You know, when I drive on a freeway, college that's really close to me is East LA College. And when I saw, you know, a banner, enroll today, classes start, so-and-so, and it had a picture of, you know, people of color. I was, as a former community college student, I was proud to see, you know, the local community college represented when I'm driving along the freeway, right? I think there should be campaigns about this so that the public understands, you know, these opportunities, right? My brothers and I benefited from dual enrollment. They weren't called dual enrollment classes back in the day, but they benefited from these classes in the 90s and the early 2000s, as did I, right? So these things have been happening, but I don't think unless you have that counselor, that really targeted messaging to parents where people understand that this is an opportunity and the benefits of it, and those things are clear, folks won't be able to sign up and take advantage of that.
So I want to transition to a question. This one is posed a little bit more about sort of dual enrollment and costs, right? But I think it's important to think about costs of trying to scale both of these programs. So John, thinking about this particular question is from an audience member who's from Cal State Los Angeles, and a four-year institution, where it might be more expensive to provide dual enrollment opportunities, or just the economics of it are a little bit different. So wondering if you could talk about kind of the funding behind dual enrollment, the way, you know, whether there are additional resources for four-year institutions that are trying to serve, especially those in, you know, population areas like Los Angeles with populations that could use it.
Yeah, well, I would just say, like, you know, one thing that's very clear from like looking at cost as like an exclusionary policy is that we can't have equitable access to dual enrollment if there's really any sort of substantial cost to students and families. You know, I've seen some places that it's like, you know, maybe $20 a class. They want to have like some sort of skin in the game. That's one thing, but if there's like a tuition and fee cost with this, then I think it's just a different thing than a college access and equity strategy. So in about 26 states across the country, it's free for students and families to participate in dual enrollment. So there's a bunch of states where it's not, or it sort of varies by locality. The funding comes from different sources. The state, you know, is very common. Like the state will sort of provide, you know, either just reimburse the K-12s and the colleges for the courses, so the students don't have to pay, or like someone in Ohio said, like, we have a fair state funding policy because both the colleges and the K-12 districts lose money on dual enrollment, but it's free for students and families. So like everybody kind of like absorbs some of the costs. What we've looked at the economics of this for community colleges specifically. So I'm less familiar with the sort of four-year landscape, but maybe some of this would apply to like a broad access four-year. basically because community college enrollments are down nationally and there's just like open seats. And, you know, because high school dual enrollment is growing and the share of recent high school grads enrolling at community colleges has been declining, losing market share like nationally to 4 years, there really are business incentives for community college leaders to sort of step up the outreach and support to really make dual enrollment a college access and equity strategy, because you're basically building a supply of future college students that are already admitted, already successful, already on their way, oftentimes to a university partner for a bachelor's. And so that's like the business case for really sort of, and it deals with, it also is sort of incentivized just with the reality that in like large urban districts, like in Philadelphia, where I'm based here, you know, only about half of high school graduates are going to any college. So you have this, it's not about like taking students who are going to go to university and having them come back to the community college. No. This is about like getting more students who are not, who are just like, why should I go to college? Like, what's the point? I'm going to just get in a bunch of debt. It's really kind of getting that group to really, you know, have a start on a debt-free pathway to a college degree before they finish high school. And, you know, by the way, come back to community college after. So that's like the business case. And I think it's, you know, it's exciting in terms of really driving change in the high school to college transition because of the alignment right now of incentives between colleges, you know, and their K-12 partners.
Taylor, I'm going to turn the cost question to you. What are some of the costs to the state, to the systems, to the high schools? You know, what are some of the things that policymakers are going to have to think about as they're adopting resources for a direct admissions program?
Yeah, I'm gonna play like the normal research card and say it depends. So, but it really does, right? Think structurally about how direct admissions has to function, right? Like we need a data system that allows us to observe all high school students and whatever we want to use. You know, if we want to just admit everybody, we need to know how to contact them. We need addresses, email addresses, things like that, right? We then need to be able to connect their K-12 records to the post-secondary records so we can transfer their transcript right from a 2-year, you know, to a 2-year to 4 years, something like that. And so in many states, that's really cheap because they have a central governing board for, like in Idaho, K-12 and higher ed. They have a state longitudinal data system. And so this is literally walking the file like across the hallway, right? And so I think Idaho estimated their costs to be around $30,000 a year to operate these programs. In other places, though, like in Minnesota, another really early adopter, they had to kind of start from the ground up, right? Like they have multiple systems of higher education, and their K-12 department, at least the data systems where they can observe students' course grades, those are completely decentralized. And so they're working with multiple data vendors, and they're doing lots of MOUs and things like that. And they're receiving state support to do that. And so they estimate their costs, I think, around $500,000 a year to operate these programs. However, I will say, if we think about the robust suite of student support services, higher education like interventions, anywhere from $30K to $500K is substantially cheaper than a robust, the cost to operate really robust, like need-based and merit-based financial aid programs. And so I think that's why direct admissions programs are getting a lot of play right now. You know, I do feel like every day I see something from Inside Higher Ed, like a new state's doing this or something, because they are common sense, but they're also relatively affordable for states or institutions to ultimately adopt. But it's 100% free for students. It should be 100% free for students. It should be 100% free, for high schools. So there should be no cost to participate. What we're doing is using technology to connect things, so students aren't having to tell us 100 times, that my name is X or that this is my GPA or something like that as well.
So I think one of the questions that we get sort of in response to a lot of our briefs here at the campaign is, California is huge, right? We've got these 3 different public systems, 140 something institutions all told. So I would love to hear thoughts about just sort of in states with larger or multiple systems, how might these be scaled, a direct admissions program that has sort of those multiple tiers and a big geographic reach. And John, similarly, just sort of how do we construct dual enrollment programs that sort of recognize, again, this complexity beyond the sort of the community college entrance?
Maybe I'll jump in first. So it can be done, right? I think Minnesota should be like an exemplar for this because they are in a complex state, right, with multiple systems, different school districts, different levels or tiers of institutions. They started with a really diverse stakeholder group, a working group, people from the legislature, people from K-12, from higher ed, inside and outside of this enterprise, who came together to decide what this program was going to look like. And then people really have to play ball, right? You need to make a lot of decisions. Where are our data going to come from? What is our threshold going to be? What's going to be in the letter? And so as you add on additional stakeholders, right, like in California, that just kind of increases complexity, but we shouldn't let complexity mean that we're not able to think about direct admissions or simplifying the college going process for places, right? Like California is complex, but that's also one of its greatest strengths. And so I think like convening a group of people who are going to be able to be in positions to get this done, I think is going to be critically important. And one big get this done thing is going to be around data and communications. So what institutions are going to participate? How are we going to get data from K-12 to be able to identify these students and send them these letters? I think those are two big things that are like forefront in my mind from working with states who are thinking about it at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say sort of like as sort of an observer of, what's going on in California, that this is just a really sort of exciting and pivotal time for dual enrollment. It's been large in California. It's always big in California, right? But it's like been even growing more recently. And so I think like nationally, when we look at that like 1.5, 2 million sort of count of high school students taking dual enrollment, I think California's growth is going to really fuel that national growth because, there's really strong investments from the state government, around dual enrollment, supports for institutions, and just a big vision from Chancellor Christian on dual enrollment for all high school students. And like really kind of what does that mean and what does that look like, but, I think from her work at the Kern district, there you have these exemplars of what does it look like to have 70% of a high school taking dual enrollment, and this sort of vision of the on-ramp to post-secondary for underserved communities, including to the local CSUs and including, really focusing on this as a racial equity transfer effort. So I think it's it's exciting. I think there's a lot to learn as this sort of emerges, just in terms of even outside of California. But I'd draw back to Adrian, your point before about like how to ensure that with this growth we have good quality, well-taught, inclusive courses, and the sort of what are the big barriers here around just access to qualified or credentialed high school instructors that are connecting with and serving the students well in the classroom. So I think about that, but I think there's you've got great researchers and folks really working on the ground with leaders at the colleges and high schools. So I think we're really looking to California to lead on this.
So I invite folks to continue dropping questions in the chat. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more. And I think one of the things that has struck me about these two policies, right, is just the amount of coordination that you need especially between high school and college, but the coordination factors required. And so I'm going to kick this actually to Adrian first to talk. What are some of the structural sort of elements of this type of collaboration, of partnership between segments and elements of higher ed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I would actually talk about the 4-year institutions. So like I was sharing, kind of dual enrollment, I think should be a bridge. And at the end of that bridge, there should be some kind of something that leads to the end point, right? There should be an anchor or some kind of connection point. And I think for me, I think the question is like, what is the point of a dual enrollment class if a university like USC doesn't accept it for transfer credit, right? And this isn't hyperbole. This is happening, and we're trying to undo that. So I think it perpetuates racial inequities when universities don't accept college level courses for transfer. And if you look at the data, most diversity from 4 universities comes from the transfer student body. That's one of the biggest sources of diversity at most 4-year institutions. So to penalize students of color predominantly who, who are taking these courses that are taught by fully qualified course instructors, that to me is not okay. So being able to bridge those kinds of relationships, especially with the 4 years, to realize that this is an equity issue for many students to be able to take these classes and for them to be able to count towards their degree once they transfer. I think that's really, really important. And so having those partnerships is key.
Taylor, John, anything to add?
Yeah, I think you're talking about like kind of the challenge of the coordination across sectors with, like community colleges are working with dozens of high schools. Like you're talking about dozens of principals, more than 30, 40 counselors, all these assistant principals. That's just the people. It's just also administratively very challenging, like logistics, just the logistics, like the regulations. There is just a lot, it's just like so many layers of the onion to peel back. So I think that it takes both people, but also processes and back-end business processes. So, like people talk about, oh, we have this paper-based registration system, and then papers get lost when they're sent home for parent approval. So, just a lot of need for like the logistics and the processes to actually do this at a large scale, and that takes time and investment and support, like assistance. And then the other thing that we commonly hear, one president always talked about how dual enrollment used to be like the side door, of entry to the college, but now it's the front door. And you have these community colleges with like a third or more of enrollment are high school dual enrollment students. And this is like the primary way that students are really starting their community college journey. But in higher ed, we don't change our org structures very quickly. So, you have these disconnects. Like you're talking to somebody in Florida, they're like, well, we've got a third of the college's enrollment and it's like me and a half-time admin like doing this. So, I think college leaders need to really look at, how they're organizing around, who they're serving. And, are there the right staffing and sort of, processes in place to really do this well? And yes, there's going to be cost. Advisors, dedicated time, outreach. If you do this well, there are costs, but there's a whole lot of incentives to, including business and both returns on investment monetarily, but more importantly, on the mission of these colleges. So, and I think you've got great exemplars in California and across the country. So, as a researcher, we're trying to just put out these examples, show people what's possible, get folks organized around this mindset around dual enrollment as an access and equity strategy.
I think something I'll just really quickly add around the coordination piece, there is an important role for state policymakers at this time too, to simplify these processes, right? There are tons of laws, regulations, things on the books that make it so that high schools have to go college by college, or colleges have to go high school by high school to do these MOUs or to have credits transferred, or that there has not been an investment in a state longitudinal data system that allows the transferring of these course grades of automatic admissions. And so at the same time, we're thinking about simplifying and facilitating these processes. We can also think about using that policy window to move forward, right? What if we auto-enroll people in dual enrollment and we, auto-enroll, we did direct admissions and we got the Student Aid Commission on board to auto, award students with financial aid earlier in their high school career. And so I think like thinking about the simplification is really important. And just to underscore one of John's last points, there are costs associated with doing these things. There are costs associated with not doing them. There is a social cost to racial inequality, to educational opportunity, right? By structurally disadvantaging portions of our population, we necessarily mean we're not realizing full economic development, community development, if we want to only think about it in one lens. So I think these investments help all people, right? But there's definitely a policy window here for states, institutions, and communities to move forward.
Excellent. So I'm going to pose one final question before I transition back to Audrey to close us out. But my question is a pretty simple one for the folks who are listening, for the policymakers who are thinking about direct admissions programs, dual enrollment programs, this landscape of high school to college. What are the three things that you really do want them to take away from today about sort of your respective domain? I'll start with Adrienne and then we'll go to Taylor, then John.
I think I would think about the piece I started off with, thinking about like the training, onboarding, recruitment of faculty. How are we situating mainly the instructors that support students and that experience dual enrollment courses? I would say that, and I think really, being able to have training for different leaders on how to be race conscious, how to do this work in light of Prop 209 and the most recent, affirmative action SCOTUS decision. So being able to help support people understand what are ways that you can still do a lot of this work. There's a lot of myths that you can't do certain things because of the SCOTUS decision. So being able to convey that so people know that and what is their role in that process. And I think the last thing for me is just empowering leaders, educational leaders, to be able to do this work with resources and agency, really. I think we were all talking about how bureaucratic institutions are and the barriers that are created through that process. So if we want to implement dual enrollment, direct admissions, guided pathways, any kind of reform, we really need to think about how are people being empowered to do this and to do it effectively.
Feels like an icebreaker question. No, I think like the one thing I would say is just like, we need to do more like asking ourselves why, why are we doing this? Our brief includes a really great quote from an institutional administrator that says, why have we been asking for students to write these essays, to send these transcripts for things that we already have access to or that we're not even really focusing on? And so ask ourselves why we're doing the things that we have been doing for so long. Inertia is so strong, right? So ask ourselves why, think about ways we can reinvent the ways that we're doing this. I think related to that is thinking about like pathways and context, right? So we kind of think often in silos, right? Like admissions process or the application process. Then we think about financial aid. Then we think about dual enrollment or guided pathways. Then we think about something else. This is the same student engaging in all of these like 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 different areas. Is there a way that we can think more holistically about transitions into high school, into dual enrollment, or AP, into college, then into the workforce? And so I think there's a space for us to think about who needs to be at the table and what if we mow down a barrier, if you will, for a student, at step 1, but there's an even bigger barrier at step 4, like what are we really doing? Or could we have, maybe anticipated that and made a better improvement? And I think a third thing I would just say is when direct admissions, just to speak specifically about that, was kind of first proposed, like people thought this was really radical, right? We can't just automatically admit people to college. What are our advisors going to do? What are admissions officers going to do, right? But it's okay for us to, I think radically to reimagine, like the college going pipeline, because ultimately at the end of the day, what we're doing right now isn't working, right? We're making some incremental progress, but we have decades-long gaps in college going by race, ethnicity, by socioeconomic status, by region, by all of these other indicators. And so we are making incremental progress in some areas, but I think to maybe radically close those gaps, we need to think radically. And so I encourage more states and institutions to be really innovative on this front.
Ooh, this is a big one. All right, so 3 things. I think one thing is like we're in a college access crisis right now. Like nationally and in most states, college enrollment is down among recent high school grads. And it's like, is this going to be coming back? We're talking about millions of students every year not going to college, despite all of the benefits that we know to society and to students and communities. So dual enrollment's already at scale. So I think the takeaway is like, let's put it to work. As an on-ramp into college. And, part of that's about access, but it's also about access to what, and building on students' interests and motivations to make college seem like worthwhile, not just affordable, but also like worthwhile. So, that I think that's just a change in mindset from like thinking about like readiness to like, what about relevance? And I think like, relevance and supports is how we can put it to work. And we know it's possible. Number two, dual enrollment really does work for all. So we have these general sort of positive effects research, but I do want to highlight a couple studies from my CCRC colleagues. Was looked at this in Florida, looked at this sort of causal approach to the effect of dual enrollment course taking. And they're finding things like not just enrollment in college going up, but enrollment in STEM majors in college, applications to very selective universities. And not only are those like just finding effects and impacts, but it's driven by Black students, by Black high school students. So this can be done, and it can be done well. And I would just echo what Adrian said about empowering leaders. We've tried to look at just nationally districts and their racial equity gap and access to dual enrollment and try to explain state policy, how much does that contribute? Local district factors, resources, segregation, how much does this contribute? But we just can't explain a lot of that variation because what institutions do and what individuals do matters. And so, practitioners, the mindset they bring to this work, all of their discretionary decisions during the day around their work, it matters. And so I think empowering leaders, training them with this equity mindset and putting, where there's a will, there's a way. And that's what we're seeing across different state contexts, that it really can be done, but it's the people who are doing the work and they need the support.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that discussion. Again, I want to add my gratitude to all three of our panelists for taking the time today. To these authors for their reports, please head to our website, download these and the other reports in the series, and keep an eye out for the ones that are coming. We have several more in the queue. And also, I want to note Adrian and his center has a new report out, Avenging for Equity, which I highly recommend. It's an engaging piece and with some important themes. So with that, Audrey Dow, would you please bid us adieu?
Thank you so much, Vikash. And for those of you still with us today, if you would use that little function there to give everybody a virtual round of applause. What a robust and rich discussion. Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you, John. Thank you, Taylor, not just for your comments and insight today, but again, for the time you have taken to put together the briefs and the information that you've imparted to all of us. And I know that each one of you are available to any of those watching to take questions and offer some guidance. I think it was really clear from today's conversation that, as institutions, as states, as policymakers are thinking about direct admissions, are thinking about dual enrollment, are thinking about programs that are designed, to increase admissions, that we have to be thinking about racial equity at the forefront, that has to be the lens by which we are creating a program. Because if we don't, then we end up with intentional gaps. We are building into our programs and our policies discrimination and segregation, and we're perpetuating it. And I think that, those of us on this call, that is not the intention. That is not what we want to do with any of these programs. But it's clear, if we don't start the design with equity at the forefront, it's not just students at the forefront, it's racial equity at the forefront, that we likely are going to get it wrong. And we're going to repeat and have persist racial inequities. One of the things that we do at the Campaign for College Opportunity is we do something that our president taught us, which is a postmortem for all of our, again, policies, even for our internal kind of practices, how we go about doing an event. And one of the things we think about is what are the things we gather in a room? What are all the things that could go wrong with this policy? And we map it out, in a room and say, okay, then how do we better design this so we don't get those outcomes? And Adrian, I feel like I heard you loud and clear. If we're really thoughtful about how we implement these policies, we can see what are going to be the negative outcomes for students of color if we design it this way. So how can we develop early on, not the interventions, but initial design so that we don't get those outcomes and replicate. So much good insight. I really appreciate it. Again, as Vikash shared, you can go onto our EIA website and download the dual enrollment brief written by John Fink. You can read the direct admissions brief by Taylor Odell. I also want to encourage you to read another brief that we just produced called Greater Equity in Higher Education Through Math Opportunity. That brief was written by our great and amazing champion and partner, Pam Birdman, who is with Just Equations. And that's really about thinking differently about math and how we often use math as a gatekeeper to college admissions, and how we can think about curriculum and requirements, the type of offerings we're giving and who has access to them. How do we think about math differently so that math is not an really arbitrary barrier to college admissions and college success? So I invite you to read that brief that is already online on our website. Again, we are so grateful to those of you who joined us. Again, you can go onto our website and see a lot more policy papers that are published and more to come. Please continue to follow us on social media to stay involved and learn about what is coming down the pipeline. We have a number of briefs coming up on financial aid. I know we talked a lot about that today. So how, for example, our FAFSA completion, our mandatory FAFSA completion here in California is working, how things like the Cal Grant equity reform and thinking about total cost of college policies can really be beneficial to students. So please stay tuned, join us. Thank you again for being with us today. Thank you, Adrian, John, Taylor, Vikash for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you soon for our next round of briefs. Thank you again.